Yeah, bonjour. Merci Laurent pour l'invitation. Thanks for having me here to speak about content blockchain. I'm very happy to be given this opportunity. Content blockchain, which was initiated by me and Titus Pan, who's also in the audience here today. And in the following 20 minutes, I would like to provide you with a brief overview about the project and the ICC, the International Standard Content Code. Since we started with the project in 2016, a lot has happened in the world of blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Both have triggered an explosion of innovation in almost any industry. Thinking of banking, logistics, gaming, or the insurance, food, health industries, companies like IBM or Microsoft and others are coming up with hundreds of real-life, real-world applications that will, in my strong belief, change these industries forever. Last week, you might have heard, Facebook announced that it will roll out its own digital currency called Libra, providing access to digital payments to billions of users through their popular apps like WhatsApp, Instagram, and of course, Facebook. Also, startups in the media industry are investigating opportunities, especially in the visual arts. Digital collectives is a huge thing that has been triggered by the CryptoKitties projects, and also in the music industry. But the question that we have been addressing is what blockchain and crypto means for book and ebook publishing. For those of you who are not familiar with the technology, in a very broad and most general definition, blockchain can be described as a decentralized and distributed networks of computers and nodes that validate and process transaction data and other metadata to permanently store them into the blocks of the chain. This decentralized and distributed environment enables immutable payment transactions and the transaction transfer of value peer-to-peer without the need of centralized institutions or centralized platforms. So it's not the banks, it's not the intermediaries, nor the retailers or other centralized institutions, but the network itself validates and settles transactions on a distributed and thus immutable chain. Once the blocks with the transactions are included in the chain, it becomes almost impossible to change a common consensus on the history of these transactions. Blockchain adds a new layer on top of the internet. An open, neutral, and distributed network for the transfer of value, money, or in our context, of licenses or other media assets. Blockchain can be useful if you are doing business in an online environment which is decentralized, distributed, and trustless. Imagine use cases in your business where you, or when you can't or don't want to know the parties you are dealing with in order to perform a valid transaction. Imagine global direct-to-consumer sales transactions which can happen much easier and at much lower costs on the blockchain than if it were handled through the traditional chain of distribution, which almost always includes the hassle of negotiations, distribution of files and metadata, intermediaries, and banks in between sellers and buyers, all of them taking a large cut, of course, of the value. The internet enables us to access and share media content or other information in a network that was supposed to be decentralized. But the business logic of services and platforms on the internet has led to an accumulation of power and control by a limited number of companies. These companies control supply and demand of e-commerce. They handle the user accounts, the payments, debtors management, and provide access to the services, content, goods, or organize logistics and fulfillment. They control the legal agreements with the supplier on the one hand and with a customer on the other hand. Blockchain has the potential to disrupt the power of these centralized platforms. As decentralized commerce emerges, new platforms will arise that work entirely different in a number of ways. Instead of handling and facilitating transactions through their own accounts, they will support peer-to-peer transactions direct to consumer. No third parties will be needed to oversee trade any longer. No banks will be needed for clearing financial transactions or the transfer of value. International sales will be possible without currency conversions. Transactions will be borderless, permissionless, and censorship-resistant. And none the least, instead of relying on centralized services to guarantee the access to the content, information, or data, users will eventually be in charge of their own accounts through decentralized and so-called self-sovereign identities and become true owners of their assets they buy. No more vendor lock-in. When we started the Content Blockchain project, it has been our goal to develop the necessary open standards, technologies, and applications that established media content as a subject of transactions on blockchain. And to be clear, a blockchain will usually not store any content on its ledger. In most cases, the blockchain works with transaction hashes and data about the transaction. In the course of the project, we identified 3 layers that we considered to define an ecosystem which is dedicated to media content. The blockchain layer on the bottom, the building blocks, and a layer for applications on which companies and startups could develop their own individual business models, shops, user applications, and interfaces. The first basic layer describes how the network protocol will validate transactions on the blockchain. Apart from the transaction data, we thought it should be possible for rights owners to publish additional metadata about the content or license information in so-called data streams. We also wanted to support tokenization of content. To give just one example how this can be interesting. Tokenization also means that publishers will be able to publish limited editions of digital publications in order to create scarcity for digital collectibles. Just like you can limit a print run to a defined and serialized numbers of copies, this can now be done with digital media. Blockchain allows to create unlimited or a limited number of tokens that can be understood as digital representations of, let's say, content licenses or other digital or physical assets. And most important, the governance of the blockchain. It is designed to regulate the way the blockchain is working so that it serves the interest of the creators and the media industries, defines, for instance, the way how users and rights owners are verified, how transactions are validated on the blockchain, and how applications and services on the top layer how they would work on the blockchain that are created on top of this media environment. The discussion about the chain governance of the content blockchain is still an ongoing process, and we would like to invite you to participate in this discussion. So reach out if you are interested to discuss this with us. The second layer describes the building blocks of this ecosystem. These building blocks are necessary to define before you can even think about trade of media content on the blockchain. Content identification, the first building block, is the most fundamental prerequisite for efficient transactions in a distributed and decentralized and increasingly heterogeneous media environment, because before we can even start discussing about content trade on a blockchain, we need to make sure that all participants in this network know what content they are transacting about. Content needs to be identified unambiguously. And this is why we came up with a proposal for the International Standard Content Code, the ISCC. The ICC can be used to register content on the blockchain, but the content code can also be used in off-chain environments or even offline in your local data or content repositories. The ICC is a universal standard code for digital files in various file formats like text, image, audio, and video. And it is supposed to become a cross-industry standard for various industries like academic publishing or various sectors, academic publishing, trade publishing, music industry, news publishers, stock photo agencies, and other sectors. The underlying question for the ICC has been, is it possible to come up with an identifier code that is generated from the content itself, like a fingerprint of the file, without the need to manually manage the IDs? In a literal sense, the ICC has to be understood as content code. It identifies the content through algorithms instead of manually assigning a number or ID to the content. And it has been the primary scope of the proposal to define and standardize the way how this content code can be generated from the content itself by anyone. And this is what distinguishes the ICC from other existing identifiers. Anyone with access to the content can create the content code. It could be the rights owner, the intermediary, the retailer, or the user that would like to create the ICC for various reasons. The ICC comes with built-in features. It can be used for internal data and document management. It can support digital distribution between market participants. The content code alone will identify and connect different versions from a product within its life cycle, or connect related products in different media formats only by having access to the ID. And because you can choose to create individual ISCCs for content chunks like chapters, paragraphs, tables, images, the ICC can help to manage granular and multimedia content in an automated way. In the next slide, I would like to present you two examples from a proof of concept that we did last month with Avato Bertelsmann, the largest distributor on the German market. So here we created two ISCC for two images in different file formats with the same, obviously the same content. You can see the four components of the ISCC. which are identifying content on various layers, from the abstract work, so to speak, down to the individual file, which is the instance ID cryptographic hash in the fourth component. Despite of the different encoding of the JPEG and the PNG files, the so-called content ID that you see in green highlighted, the content ID remains the same. And this intended collision indicates that the contents of the images are 100% the same, which you can tell by the ID without having a look at the images, if you do that with your repository. In the second example, we created ICCs for an EPUB and a PDF file. Despite of the different encoding of the PDF and the EPUB file, the content ID resembles a similarity of 69%, indicating that the content is most likely the same. The similarity of the content is preserved in the two IDs, just like other information about the content or its relations to previous versions or related products. Last month, in a meeting in Ottawa, ISO accepted the ICC as a preliminary work item, which is the first stage of the official standardization process. Over the next months and years, we will work together with experts from many countries across the world and every media industry and the library community to establish the ICC as a global standard for digital content identification. In order to promote the ICC and communicate the standard, the ICC Foundation has been established in the most beautiful city of Leiden in the Netherlands. This is where I live. And as the chairman of the board of the ICC Foundation, I would like to encourage you to reach out to us, get familiar with the standard, take the code, experiment it, use it, test it with your content, and use the demo applications that we provide on GitHub and the websites of the ICC project, icc.codes. Titus and I will be available for questions on all two conference days. There's, to get to the last part with with a question where this blockchain and ICC can lead us. For the content blockchain project, the ICC has been like the fundamental building block, because now when the content is unambiguously identified or even chunks and registered on the blockchain, rights owners can inseparably attach additional information to the ICC, like metadata, rights or license information, or information about potential business models. So the ICC will serve as a link to additional information that are provided from the rights owner. And with access to the content or the ICC, anyone, on the other hand, will be able to discover and access the terms provided by the rights owner and then, let's say, resell, sub-license, or use the content according to the defined licensing terms, which are also accessible through the blockchain. Let me give you a few examples at the end of possible use cases. This is actually something I come across quite often. I don't know who made this photo, unfortunately. So, or can anyone tell me who shot it? I would like to use it. So, the question is, who is the rights owner, and for what are the terms that are attached to this content in terms of reproduction? With the ICC, you just create the ID from the Twitter photo, so anyone can generate the ID and search on the blockchain whether some terms are provided by the rights owner, like, let's say, a €5 reprint license, or to use it in an online magazine or whatever. So The same goes for news articles or blog posts. So any author could connect, let's say, reprint license for magazines or digital use in newsletters, which happens quite frequently, to every post, and publish the terms on the blockchain. What if users would like to license a song to use it as a background for a YouTube video or an Instagram video? How would you even do that? So, seen from a user's perspective, licensing digital content is often an all too complicated and inefficient process that involves time-consuming and manual work by all parties to identify and the content and the rights owners and the pricing and perform the actual transactions. Whereas in the blockchain environment, any user can simply generate an ICC from a song, search for available sync licenses that record labels, of course, need to provide on the blockchain, and perform a transaction and have a valid, a license agreement that is documented on the chain. Think of any local bookshop around the corner which could offer its own subscription service to their customers. Or think of a secondary market for ebooks where publishers would earn money with every resale. This could be a legal option. Speaking of legal opportunities and obligations, in March 2019, the European Parliament decided on a reform of copyright laws. And this reform has been lobbied and welcomed by many media industry organizations around the world. Yet its immense technical and operational consequences have not really been discussed that much. Because due to Article 17, previously known as Article 13, businesses and platforms will soon be required to verify and clear the rights of content that has been published or uploaded by users to the platform. And to be clear, we are speaking of millions of publications on thousands of platforms. We are speaking of traditionally published content, we are speaking of user-generated content, and the legal requirement for the platform entails a simple precondition that at the same time the rights owners are requested to provide the terms that are associated to the content, even if it says don't use it, right? So they need to make content licenses available and broadly accessible on a global scale, and they must provide a clear and simple rights expression for potential licensees, for instance, the platforms. And they must support an easy and automated way to allow users to acquire the rights from the rights owners. And we think that blockchain technology will support rights owners to get legitimate remuneration for their work and at the same time provide legal security for the platforms and the users of media content. Blockchain will offer numerous opportunities for startups as well as established companies to come up with new business models and innovative way to distribute or sell digital content. And we would like to invite all of you to get familiar with the technology, reach out, and help to shape the media environment of the future. Thanks.
We may have some questions.
Ça va maintenant? Okay. So they are impressive numbers, but do you also have numbers about false positives? Because, you know, the two photographs that you show, they are identical by the ICC and by your process, which is great. Mm-hmm. But when would the two photographs become different?
That is a very technical question.
Yeah.
So maybe Titus, do you want to answer that question? So
So this is the reason why it is made up from different components. Of course, there will be collisions. It's even false positives will happen statistically with the more content has these ID components. You can choose the different components. You can use them separately. There will be unintended collisions. But this is why you have the different components. So you likely will only have a collision in one of the components. And especially the last component, which is a cryptographic hash, will vary with every little change in the data. And there is also, beyond that ID that you have been seen, there is a more lengthy Merkle tree root hash, whatever. This is cryptographically guaranteed to distinguish two different files on the data level. The features of clustering will create false positives, but there is no way around it. And I think anything that helps us deduplicate and find similar content is better than nothing we have now. And the idea is to externalize fingerprinting technologies, which are to democratize and standardize them, which are in use in companies like Facebook and Google. They use these technologies internally. They are just not interoperable in any way. And I think there's room for an open standard to bring this out.
Thanks for the presentation, which was impressive. But what gives you the confidence that the big players like Facebook, Amazon, etc., will subscribe to a standard which is not of their own making? Because no, it's a serious question. We, for instance, for books, we do have a very well-established standard with the ISBN, but Amazon has more or less gradually started to stop using this, replacing it with their own standard. So introducing a new one, which only makes sense when everybody really subscribes to it, is really a challenging enterprise.
Yes, I would agree, but if you have an experiment with this ICC and have the experience for the first time that two people in two countries and two different computers come up with the same ID for the content, you see the potential, especially for digital distribution. And we start with Avato and like the digital group in the working group in the German Publishers Association to embed the ICC into the ONIX or metadata, so that you can check, for instance, if you already have the file in your repository when you get new content files in, or a previous version of it. So there are quite a few benefits for digital distribution, and we just start with the ones who will accept it, and Amazon will follow in the end. They will follow, maybe not, but if it's convincing, then this will be used, and we will start. And start also, I mean, the question could also be addressed to blockchain technology as a whole. Like, I mean, this is only, your question referred to the identifier, but the whole smart licensing will happen. This is pretty clear, and it's not in the interest of Amazon to have decentralized identities and or ownership to content, because they lock the content of the customer to their user accounts. So that will not be in the interest of the large enterprises, but it will grow and it will start and it will get used.
Thank you for the presentation. I understand the standard on one side.
Yes.
But on the other side, I understand that this ICC number has to be generated.
Yes.
So there are some algorithms,
Yes.
there are some tools, are they open source?
Yes.
Will they be standardized too?
Yes. So I answered your question. So it's open sourced on GitHub. Everything that's being developed, like applications, we have a command line tool that's up and running that you can use for your repositories and to create these numbers and create similarity number like percentages and so on. So you can use it. It's and the documentation on the website iscc.codes is available. And before I forget, because all three presentations before mentioned the financial aspects, of course, the ICC Foundation is looking forward to be supported. There are developers that need to be funded. We have a lot of plans. There's a lot of communication necessary. So if you are interested in funding the ICC Foundation and help to continue this development, then reach out to us.
So yeah, I had a question about the computing costs of the ICC. Because each ICC has to be computed from content.
Yes.
We know that some blockchains are have quite heavy environmental impacts, like bitcoins.
Yes.
Some other, like Libra, I think are not decentralized; they are centralized.
True.
Like they have private computing nodes.
Yes.
Have you thought about this computing cost and what's in the design? What does it scale? Because
Yes.
the contents can be massive.
Yes, we think about it for more than 3 years or even longer. So this is the main question regarding like the governance of the content blockchain, where the mining, of course, is one part, and we are investigating to have like an environmental friendly mining consensus algorithm. But that's a tough discussion, and we are happy to elaborate and talk about it. And the reason why we decided to come up with a separate content blockchain, like a separate dedicated network form dedicated to media content, is because of the costs. The transaction fees, for instance, on Ethereum can be quite high. Let's say you have, we start with, let's say, 10 million ICC, and you want to publish the ICC with some metadata on the Ethereum blockchain. You will pay like 70 cents at this moment. That was your information, 70 cents per entry on the blockchain, so transaction fees. Whereas on the content blockchain, there will be zero or very, very, very little transaction fees to publish the information, to publish the licensing terms. This has been the reason why we did not, as so many other startups and media in the media business, go on the Ethereum blockchain, apart from many other reasons.
Hi, I'm intrigued by the content ID similarity rating for different publication formats. 96.88%, I think, was your example between a PDF and an EPUB.
Yes.
What are the heuristics or the metrics used to calculate that figure? Is that based on metadata, visual comparison, text equivalency?
So that might be another technical question for Titus, or just a short.
So the ISCC is typed, and you can read from ISCC if it identifies text or image or audio or video. So if you see the ISCC, you can see, okay, this identifies the text. And there's also a possibility of mixing different media types and coming up with a mixed ID. So the type can also be mixed media.
And the similarity is calculated?
The similarity is calculated by basically structural difference. So imagine 64-dimensional space. Every content or data has some position in the 64-dimensional space. And by comparing two IDs, you compare the structural similarity of the contents in such a 64-dimensional space.
Hello. One thing that just popped into my mind as you were talking about lack of censorship and the freedom of speech. Obviously, that's a marvelous thing, but there are some horrible types of publications that you might want to censor. Have you got any thoughts about that, the lack of control of what it is that people would be sharing?
Yes. So there's actually one aspect that came into the discussion lately, which is work done by colleagues in Canada, like a rights agency called Access Copyright. They do amazing work on blockchain as well, and we're talking to them. Especially their focus is on verifying and connecting content to the rights owners. And so what you would see on the content blockchain is an idea to kind of allow rights owners who are like verified by certain local institutions to write information in these data streams, so that you would be like responsible for to curate. So that's basically one way to deal with the question whether the information is valid, and where that you can kind of identify the parties that because that's not usually done by the blockchain itself to identify the people, of course, but you can identify certain parts within the transaction metadata that are written by certain parties, and by of course information that is once written on the blockchain will not disappear. That's also very clear. But as I said, you would not publish content or images or texts on the content blockchain. You can, but you wouldn't necessarily want to do that, but only the hashes or the content identifiers or references to external repositories or links or these kind of information.